Mark tightened his tie in front of the mirror, his mind on the meeting he was rushing to. He glanced at his phone to check the time, only to see a notification flash across the screen, a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Same place, same time." His stomach dropped. He stared at the screen, rereading the message. It didn't make sense. His phone was synced with Anna's because they shared a family plan. This wasn't meant for him. Mark tried to push it aside, blaming it on some misunderstanding or even a scam. But the words wouldn't leave his mind as he drove to the office. Anna had been distant lately. Longer hours at work, vague excuses, and always glued to her phone. Still, the thought of her being unfaithful seemed absurd. They had been married for 20 years, built a life together, raised 2 kids. That evening, Mark couldn't shake the unease. When Anna came home, she was unusually cheerful, humming as she prepared dinner. She mentioned a late work meeting the next evening, her voice breezy, almost too casual. "Another one?" Mark asked, trying to sound neutral. "You've been working a lot lately." Anna laughed lightly. "It's that time of year. Deadlines piling up. You know how it is." He nodded, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The next day, Mark made a decision. He cleared his schedule and left work early. If Anna had nothing to hide, he'd apologize to himself for even doubting her. If she did, by 6 p.m., he was parked a block away from her office building. He watched as employees trickled out, one by one, including Anna. She wasn't alone. A man emerged with her, his hand briefly resting on her back. Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened. They walked toward a nearby cafe, laughing as they went. The man leaned closer, saying something that made Anna smile, an expression Mark hadn't seen on her face in months. For a moment, Mark debated confronting them right then and there. But something held him back. He needed more. Back home, Mark went through their shared credit card statements and noticed something odd: repeated charges at a high-end restaurant Anna had never mentioned. The name of the place was familiar. It was where they used to go for anniversaries before life got too busy. Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had enough to confirm his worst fears, but not enough to know the full story. As the evening wore on, he decided to follow Anna the next day. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about uncovering the truth. When Anna left for her meeting the following evening, Mark was already tailing her. He watched as she drove to a suburban neighborhood and parked in front of a house he didn't recognize. The man from the cafe opened the door and greeted her warmly, ushering her inside. Mark sat in his car, heart pounding, unsure of what to do next. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. Mark stayed in his car, the engine off, gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the house Anna had entered. Every logical part of him screamed to leave, to avoid making a scene, but his heart demanded answers. Who was this man, and what was Anna doing here? He waited for what felt like an eternity before the porch light flicked on, and he saw shadows moving behind the curtains. His heart pounded harder. He pulled out his phone and hesitated before dialing his best friend, Tom. "Mark, what's up?"
"You sound off," Tom answered.
Mark took a deep breath. I think she's cheating on me." There was a long pause on the other end. "Where are you?" Tom asked finally. Mark explained everything, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "Don't do anything rash," Tom warned. "Just be smart about this. If she's lying, you need proof. Stay calm." Mark nodded, even though Tom couldn't see him.
Proof.
That was the key. He didn't want to accuse Anna without being absolutely sure. A light flickered in the living room window, catching his eye. The curtains shifted, and he caught a glimpse of Anna sitting on a couch, laughing. The man joined her, handing her a glass of water. They were too close, too comfortable. Mark snapped a picture with his phone, his hands trembling. This wasn't conclusive, but it was something. The next day, Mark avoided Anna as much as possible. She acted as though nothing was wrong, casually chatting about her day and making plans for the weekend. Mark felt like he was losing his mind. How could she lie so effortlessly? He spent hours researching online, reading forums and articles about confronting infidelity. Some advised hiring a private investigator, Others suggested sitting down for a calm conversation. But Mark knew he wasn't ready for a confrontation, not yet. Instead, he decided to dig deeper. Over the next week, he quietly monitored Anna's activities. He noticed small but telling patterns: phone calls she took in the other room, vague explanations for late nights, and that same mysterious number appearing in her texts. Finally, Mark decided to test the waters. One evening, as they sat in the living room, he brought up the topic casually. "Hey, I was thinking about that Italian restaurant we used to love. Haven't been there in ages. We should go sometime." Anna froze for a split second before recovering.
"Oh, sure.
"I didn't think you liked it anymore." Her response felt rehearsed, her smile strained. Mark didn't press further, but his suspicions only grew. The turning point came when he checked the credit card statements again. Another charge had appeared, this time for a jewelry store. Mark's mind raced. He hadn't received any gifts, and their anniversary wasn't for months. That evening, Anna left for another meeting. Mark decided he couldn't wait any longer. He followed her car again, this time with more determination. She drove to the same suburban house, parking in the driveway as if she belonged there. Mark parked down the street and waited. An hour passed, then two. Finally, Anna emerged with the man holding a small gift bag. They hugged briefly before she got into her car and drove off. Mark stayed behind, staring at the house. He couldn't keep living like this. Tomorrow, he would confront her. One way or another, he would get the truth. The next morning, Mark couldn't shake the image of Anna hugging that man or the small gift bag she carried to her car. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Determined to stay composed, he waited until breakfast to broach the topic. As Anna poured herself a cup of coffee, Mark leaned on the counter, pretending to scroll through his phone. "Busy night again yesterday?" he asked casually. Anna froze for the briefest moment before replying, "Oh, just the usual work stuff. You know how it is." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he set his phone down and fixed her with a steady gaze. "Anna, are you sure it's just work?" Her hand trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice defensive. Mark shrugged. "You've been coming home late, taking calls in the other room, and last night, you seemed distracted." Anna forced a laugh. "Mark, are you accusing me of something? Because if you are, just say it." For a moment, Mark was tempted to lay everything out: the mysterious texts, the jewelry store charge, the house. But he held back. He needed to keep control. "Forget it," he said, picking up his phone. "I'm probably just overthinking." Anna sighed in relief, but Mark saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. Later that day, Mark made a bold move. He called the jewelry store listed on their credit card statement, posing as a confused customer. "Hi, I'm trying to confirm a purchase made on my account," he said, giving the date and amount. The clerk checked the records and replied, "Yes, sir." That was a custom bracelet engraved with the initials DR. Mark's stomach sank. Those weren't Anna's initials, or his. He hung up and sat in stunned silence. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. But who was DR? That evening, Mark stayed quiet, watching Anna closely as she went about her routine. She seemed oblivious, humming softly while preparing dinner. "Who's DR?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Anna froze, her back to him. Slowly, she turned around, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" Mark held her gaze. "The bracelet. The one you bought at Goldsmith Jewelers. It's engraved with DR. Who is it for?" Anna opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "Mark, I can explain." "Then explain," he snapped, his voice rising. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she sat down at the table. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling. "Then tell me what it is," Mark demanded. Anna hesitated before finally speaking. "DR is Daniel, Rebecca's fiancé. You remember Rebecca from work? She asked me to pick up the bracelet for his birthday because she was out of town." Mark's mind reeled. Was she telling the truth? Her explanation sounded plausible, but her behavior over the past weeks didn't align with an innocent errand. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" Mark asked, his tone softening slightly. "I didn't think it mattered," Anna replied, her voice growing steadier. "And I didn't expect you to go through the credit card statements." Mark studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Something still felt off, but he couldn't prove she was lying. Not yet. For now, he decided to play along, but deep down, he knew he wasn't done searching for the truth. Mark couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed next to Anna, staring at the ceiling, her explanation replaying in his mind. It sounded reasonable enough, but his gut told him there was more to the story. Early the next morning, Mark decided to dig deeper into Anna's claims. Rebecca, the supposed friend from work, had been mentioned a few times over the years, but Mark realized he didn't know much about her. He searched Anna's social media accounts for Rebecca's profile, scrolling through photos and posts. Finally, he found her page. Rebecca appeared to be a cheerful woman in her early 30s, often posting pictures with friends, co-workers, and her fiancé, Daniel. Mark's stomach tightened as he examined the photos. Daniel wasn't the man Anna had been meeting. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting. If Rebecca's fiancé was someone else, why had Anna mentioned him in her excuse? Mark saved a few photos and decided to ask Tom for advice. Later that afternoon, Mark met Tom at their favorite diner. Over coffee, Mark laid out everything he had discovered, including Anna's explanation about the bracelet. Tom frowned, tapping his finger against his mug. "It doesn't add up," he said finally. "If this Daniel guy isn't the man she's been meeting, then she's definitely lying about something. The question is, how far does it go?" Mark nodded. "I don't want to accuse her without more proof. But I can't keep living like this, either." Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "Have you thought about confronting that guy directly? The one from the house?" Mark hesitated. The thought had crossed his mind, but it felt risky. "I don't even know his name or how to approach him." Tom smirked. "Well, there's a simple way to find out. If you're up for it." That evening, Mark put Tom's plan into motion. He parked near the suburban house again, waiting for the man to appear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the front door opened, and the man stepped out to retrieve his mail. Mark's heart raced as he got out of his car and walked toward the house. The man looked up, surprised to see a stranger approaching. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone polite but cautious. Mark forced a smile. "Hi, sorry to bother you. I'm Mark, Anna's husband." The man's face changed in an instant. Shock, then discomfort, then something Mark couldn't quite place.
Hi.
"I'm David," he said, extending a hand reluctantly. Mark ignored the gesture. "I was hoping you could help me clear something up. Anna mentioned you're a friend from work, but I'm starting to feel like there's more to it." David glanced around nervously, his eyes avoiding Mark's. "I think you should talk to Anna about this," he said quickly. Mark stepped closer, his voice firm. "I'm talking to you now. Are you seeing my wife?" David's silence was damning. He shifted uncomfortably, his expression guilty. "I don't want to cause trouble," David mumbled. "It's not what you think." Mark's temper flared. "Then tell me what it is. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Anna and we've been working together on a project outside of work. She didn't want to tell you, because it's personal. That's all." Mark didn't believe a word of it. What kind of personal project involves secret meetings and buying expensive jewelry? David stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Jewelry? I don't know anything about that." Mark stared him down, his anger boiling over. "This isn't over, David. And if you've done anything to hurt my family, you'll regret it." Mark turned and walked away, his chest heaving with anger and frustration. He didn't get the answers he was looking for, but one thing was clear. David was hiding something, and Anna was involved. This time, Mark wouldn't let it slide. He was determined to uncover the full truth, no matter what it took. Mark returned home with his thoughts racing. David's nervous demeanor and evasive answers only fueled his suspicions. The idea of confronting Anna again was daunting, but he knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. That evening, Anna seemed cheerful as usual, humming softly while chopping vegetables for dinner. Mark watched her from the doorway, his mind replaying his conversation with David. He noticed her phone sitting on the counter, and for the first time, he considered checking it. "Mark, everything okay?" Anna asked, glancing at him with a smile. He forced a nod. "Yeah, just tired. Long day at work." But the truth was his mind was working overtime. If Anna was hiding something, her phone could hold the key. Later that night, while Anna was showering, Mark made his move. He picked up her phone, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocked it with her passcode, a number he knew from years of shared trust. He opened her messages and immediately saw a thread with David's name. The conversation was filled with casual texts about work, but one message stood out. "Thank you for tonight. It meant a lot. I don't know what I'd do without you." Mark's heart sank. He scrolled further, finding more messages that, while not explicitly romantic, carried a tone of closeness and intimacy that felt out of place. Then he spotted an attachment, a photo of the bracelet from the jewelry store, accompanied by Anna's message. "I hope DR loves this. It feels perfect." Mark sat down, his mind spinning. Anna had lied about the bracelet and her connection to David. The question now was why. When Anna emerged from the bathroom, Mark was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in his hand. She froze when she saw him, her expression shifting from surprise to panic. "What are you doing with my phone?" she asked, her voice sharp. Mark held up the screen, showing her the messages. "I could ask you the same thing. Why are you texting David about how much tonight meant and sending him photos of jewelry?" Anna's face turned pale. She took a step closer, then stopped. "Mark, I can explain." "Don't," Mark interrupted, his voice trembling with anger. "Just tell me the truth. Are you cheating on me?" Anna's eyes filled with tears, and she sat down across from him.
No, Mark.
"I swear, it's not like that." "Then what is it?" he demanded. "Because all I see are lies and secrets." Anna hesitated before finally speaking. "David isn't what you think he is. He's not my lover. He's my brother." Mark blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about? You've never mentioned having a brother." Anna wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "Because I didn't know about him until recently. He's my half-brother. My mom had him before she met my dad, and she never told anyone. I found out a few months ago when he reached out to me." Mark stared at her, struggling to process the revelation. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I wanted to," Anna said, her voice breaking. "But I didn't know how. It's been so overwhelming, Mark. Meeting him, getting to know him. I didn't want to bring it up until I was sure of everything." The bracelet was a gift for him. It's engraved with his initials. Mark felt a mix of relief and frustration. If Anna was telling the truth, it explained a lot. But the secrecy still stung. Why lie about it? Why make up a story about Rebecca's fiancés? Anna looked down, ashamed. "Because I panicked. When you asked about the bracelet, I thought you'd assume the worst. I didn't want to ruin everything before I had the chance to explain." Mark sat in silence, his emotions swirling. If Anna was being honest, her actions made sense, at least partially. But trust, once broken, wasn't easy to repair. "Anna," he said finally, "if you want me to believe you, I need the whole truth. No more lies, no more secrets. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll tell you everything, Mark. I promise." For now, Mark decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. But in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that the story might not be over yet. The next morning, Mark woke up with a heavy heart. Despite Anna's tearful explanation, he couldn't shake the feeling that something still didn't add up. Her revelation about David being her half-brother explained part of the mystery, but the lies and secrecy left scars on his trust. As Anna prepared breakfast, she seemed unusually quiet, her usual chatter replaced by occasional glances at Mark. He sensed her guilt but decided to stay composed. "Anna," he said finally, setting his coffee mug down. "I need to meet David." Anna looked up, startled.
What?
"Why?" "Because if he's really your brother, I want to know him," Mark replied, keeping his tone calm. "If we're rebuilding trust, this can't stay in the shadows." No more secrets. Anna hesitated, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'll arrange it. True to her word, Anna set up a meeting for later that evening at a nearby cafe. Mark's nerves were on edge as they walked in together and spotted David waiting at a corner table. He looked nervous, his hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee. David, Anna said with a forced smile, this is my husband, Mark. David stood and offered a handshake. Nice to meet you, Mark. Mark shook his hand, studying his face for any sign of deception. Nice to meet you too, he said, though his voice lacked warmth. They all sat down, and for a moment, the silence was almost unbearable. Anna finally broke it. Mark wanted to meet you, she said softly, glancing between them. David nodded, his expression earnest. I understand. I'm sure this situation seems strange. Honestly, it's been a lot for me too. Mark folded his arms. You can imagine how it looks from my perspective, my wife sneaking around, lying about where she's been, buying gifts. You'll have to forgive me for being skeptical. David sighed. I get it, and I'm sorry for any trouble this has caused. When I reached out to Anna, I didn't think about how complicated it might be for her. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo gallery, showing Mark pictures of him and Anna together at various places, coffee shops, a park, even their first meeting at a DNA testing center. This has been a journey for both of us, David said. We didn't want to involve anyone else until we were sure of the connection. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about trying to figure out our new reality. Mark examined the photos, his doubt beginning to waver. The images showed nothing suspicious, just two people clearly trying to navigate an unfamiliar relationship. I'm sorry for the lies, Anna said, her voice trembling. I should have told you from the start, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to bring this into our lives until I understood it myself. Mark leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. I need to know one thing, he said, looking at David. Is there anything else? Any part of this story? I don't know. David shook his head.
No, Mark.
That's everything. I just want to get to know my sister and figure out how we fit into each other's lives. For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a sense of relief. While the secrecy had been painful, the truth was far less sinister than he had feared. As they left the cafe, Anna reached for Mark's hand. Thank you, she whispered. Mark gave her a small nod but remained quiet. Trust would take time to rebuild, but for now, the storm seemed to be settling. Or so he hoped. Over the following days, Mark tried to let go of his lingering doubts and rebuild trust with Anna. She was making an effort, being more transparent about her time and sharing stories about David, their mother's hidden past, and how they were piecing together fragments of their family history. But something still nagged at Mark. It wasn't just the lies. It was the way Anna had seemed so comfortable deceiving him. Despite everything, the pieces still didn't quite fit. One evening, as Anna sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, Mark decided to do something he hadn't yet dared: investigate the suburban house where Anna and David had been meeting. Hey, I'm going to take a quick drive, Mark said casually, grabbing his keys. Anna looked up. This late? Everything okay? Just need some air, Mark replied, forcing a smile. As he drove toward the house, his mind raced. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he needed lay there. When he arrived, the neighborhood was quiet, with only a few porch lights illuminating the street. The house looked the same as before, unassuming and ordinary. Mark parked a little further down the street and got out, walking toward the house. He peered through the windows but saw nothing unusual, just a neat living room with a bookshelf, a coffee table, and framed photos on the walls. Curiosity drove him to take a closer look. One of the photos near the window caught his eye. It was a picture of David with an older woman, their arms around each other. The resemblance was striking. Mark's heart began to pound. Could this woman be Anna's mother? If so, why would David have a photo with her? The front door suddenly opened, and Mark froze as David stepped outside, a trash bag in hand. Mark? David asked, startled. Mark hesitated, caught in the act. I needed answers, he admitted. This house, these meetings, it's been eating away at me. I needed to see for myself. David sighed, setting the trash bag down. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Reluctantly, Mark followed him inside. The house was as ordinary as it looked from the outside, but the photos on the walls told a different story. There were more pictures of David with the same older woman, along with a few of Anna as a child. "This was my mother's house," David said, his voice quiet. "She passed away a few years ago. When I reached out to Anna, I brought her here to show her the pieces of our past, our mother's past." Mark's eyes fell on a photo of Anna's mother, much younger, holding a baby. "That's Anna?" David nodded. "Our mother kept this house a secret from everyone, including Anna's father. It's where she came when she needed space, when she wanted to keep things separate from her life with Anna's family." Mark felt a wave of guilt for doubting Anna, but another question surfaced. "Why all the secrecy now? Why not just tell me everything up front?" David hesitated. "Because Anna wasn't sure how you'd react. And to be honest, I wasn't sure either. I've been trying to navigate this new connection without tearing apart her life. Or yours." Mark nodded slowly, taking it all in. The explanation made sense, but it didn't erase the pain of the past weeks. "Does Anna know you brought me here?" Mark asked. David shook his head.
No.
"She didn't want to involve you in this until she was ready." Mark exhaled deeply. For the first time, he felt the weight of the mystery begin to lift. Maybe Anna had been telling the truth after all. "I just want things to go back to normal," Mark said quietly. "They will," David assured him. "But you have to trust her. And she has to trust you enough to stop hiding." Mark nodded, his resolve strengthening. When he returned home that night, he knew what he had to do. The next step was rebuilding, not just his trust in Anna, but her trust in him, too.